Welcome to the We Got It podcast,
an MSU sports podcast for everyone.
We're Jonah and Abby,
a husband and wife who's probably a little bit too obsessed with Spartan sports.
And we want to share a little bit of that obsession and joy with you, from casual fans
to die-hard, bleed green fanatics.
And we hope to make following Michigan State athletics more easy, enjoyable, and engaging for everyone.
So go green.
Go white.
Go
state. Welcome back to the We Got It podcast, an official podcast of Spartans Illustrated. Thanks for tuning in this week. We're always trying to reach more and more Spartan fans, so we appreciate you guys being here this week.
Absolutely. And as a smaller podcast that's getting up and off the ground, we just want to say how much we appreciate your likes, your subscriptions on YouTube, which we're now releasing video podcast episodes coming at you on Spotify too. It truly helps us reach so many more Spartan fans. That's really the only way that podcasts get more traction, YouTube videos get more traction, is by having reviews and subscriptions. So if you haven't yet, we'd appreciate if you dropped us at least a few stars. Hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, and also head over to Spartans Illustrated. You can find us there with all of our podcast episodes, video episodes linked. But then also there are so many awesome Spartan sports that are featured on that website. And so we're just really proud and excited to continue to partner with them. So yeah, check it out.
Well, Abby, we sit here Sunday afternoon.
Yes.
After a heartbreaking loss from our Spartans. How are you feeling? What are your thoughts? What's coming to your head right now?
So, I'm a very negative person. I think we've covered that before, but I'm gonna try my best to keep things more lighthearted today. Jonah and I have been talking over the last couple of weeks, very much joking, that we think Jonathan Smith and or maybe some of the coaching staff has been tuning into the podcast. And this week, I think that they listened to us a little bit too closely. Let me preface with this. The reason we've been joking about that is because it seems like we'll mention something, especially on like a We Got It Covered segment. Such as 2 weeks ago, we talked about trick plays, one of which being like a reverse, double reverse. And we were talking about, we haven't seen any trick plays out of the Spartans yet. And then the very next game, they ran a reverse. We saw another one of those this week. And so we were joking during the game, like, hey, maybe the coaching staff's tuning in. I will say, I do think the coaching staff is tuning in and that they took last week's episode far too literally. Jonah, I was teasing you for putting all of your eggs in the rush game is going to win this game basket. And Jonathan Smith, Ryan Lindgren, you did the same thing. I am very disappointed in the coaching staff from last night's game.
Yeah.
To put it lightly.
I mean, I'm with you there. It seems like they had a great game plan going into the first two drives. We were talking about how important it was for Michigan State to get in the lead early and play with that lead. And then it seems like ever since that moment when they got the lead, defense was off to a good start. They just kind of played with their tails between their legs, that they were playing more, we can't lose this game more than we have to win this game and take control. And really played like that throughout the whole rest of the game after those first couple of drives where they had that success and really didn't stretch the field at all, pressure Michigan's defensive backfield. Didn't really give Childs the opportunity to make too many plays. I don't know if they just didn't trust him. They were trying to trust the run game too much, but it just seemed like they left so much on the table in such seemingly a winnable game, It seems like 2 or 3 plays go differently, and it's a totally different result.
So yes, 2 things. Yes, I do think those few plays, like especially getting offsides on, we had 2 or 3 offsides penalties that were just completely game changers. But also, I think it's a lot more than just 2 or 3 plays. I would even argue that we started playing with our tail between our legs when we got into the red zone on the first drive. I mean, we brought so much intensity, and then you said it during the game. It just feels like we get to the red zone and it's like we don't know what to do, play calling wise. Like it's like a totally different team comes out there. And so I don't know. I mean, one, that delay of game penalty when we first got in the red zone, unexcusable. I don't care if Brian Lindgren's getting the play in late. I don't care what's going on. It has to be someone's job, if not Jonathan Smith, to say, you have to call a timeout right now. And I don't know if you can make the argument that it was strategic, that they were trying to get Michigan to jump off sides. I don't understand what the mentality is there, but to me, that mistake is unexcusable from a coaching perspective. Like, that is your job.
Yeah, and I mean, we were talking about this while we were watching the game yesterday. You're having that success on that first drive.
Yes.
The big house was rocking. Michigan, like the environment was just kind of like, it was a great environment for that game. And the opportunity to get points on the board that first drive to kind of settle the offense's just demeanor, settle the crowd down, kind of get some confidence going in. And instead, you get, again, perfect to the red zone, which again, this offense throughout the entire season has been able to get to the red zone consistently. But then, like you said, we just seemingly panic. The play calling just becomes
so
super
messy.
Bland. It just seems like it's not well thought out. And then you have the mistake with the delay of game. And then Jonathan Kim misses the 25-yard field goal, and just so deflating. You had all that momentum. And obviously, we were able to have a good start on defense and then come back with a touchdown on the next drive. But if we're up 14-0 in that game,
that's a totally different football game.
That's a totally different game. And maybe you can play more conservatively on offense to try to get the clock winding down. You don't have to take as many shots. But we just became one-dimensional on offense after those first 2 drives. Michigan was able to key in on stopping the run because Michigan State wasn't pressuring their secondary at all.
No.
In the first 3 quarters.
No. And that's where I feel really frustrated we were so pumped. Like, we had Alante Brown back last night. I mean, we've got 4 to 5 incredible wide receivers in Nick Marsh, Foster Jr., Antonio Brown, Isaiah Johnson, and Glover. And Glover, did he even touch the ball last night?
Not that I can remember, no.
I don't understand, especially after such an insanely standout performance by Nick Marsh last week against Iowa, to hardly give the kid any options. And then when we were passing the ball, it's these tiny slant passes where we're getting clobbered either at the line, original line of scrimmage, or a couple yards past, or we're running routes on 3rd down when we're passing the ball to someone who's still 3-4 yards behind the sticks. And we've been saying that all season. I don't understand those sorts of routes and those sorts of passes, especially on 3rd down. You're giving your team absolutely nothing to work with. I don't understand. Jonathan, if you're listening, Brian Lindgren, if you're listening, Joe Rossi, if you're listening, I don't know what happened to the defense from 5 minutes left in the second quarter on. It's just, they completely lost their intensity, and Jordan Turner did not have a good game. But if you guys are listening, we would love some explanations into the play calling last night. It's just sad, honestly. I feel like our players played so well. I really genuinely feel like that game was coaching errors and just a really odd strategy to play Michigan, especially at the big house. And it's just kind of maybe I'm being too harsh, but a pretty disappointing debut, honestly, for Jonathan Smith against Michigan. It just helps solidify their narrative that we're the little brother. And I hate that. I hate having that feeling coming out of that game.
I do wonder if part of, I don't know, lack of intensity or urgency from this coaching staff throughout the game has anything to do with just like, I don't know if they fully understand like how big of a game this is. Especially for Michigan State. This is a massive game, and this is a game where you look at Mark D'Antonio, like success at Michigan State starts with beating Michigan.
Yes. And that's some of those times you only ever saw D'Antonio get fired up. Like they were showing the clip before the game of like, if they want to mock us, they can mock us. Like, I don't feel like you ever get that sort of reaction out of D'Antonio, except when it comes to Michigan. And I totally agree. It felt like Jonathan Smith just like came from the West Coast and doesn't have a respect maybe for.
And it's hard going into your first game to
sorry.
have that first like understanding
Urgency.
of the rivalry. But I think you saw it with Michigan. Obviously, they have a somewhat different coaching staff. A lot of them have been around the rivalry. And when their offense was kind of a disaster that first couple drives, they had that sense of urgency. They kind of put all their cards out on the table. They were getting creative. Something wasn't working. They were going to like, they had trickery. They had misdirection. Like they were doing exactly what we hoped Michigan State would have done. Instead, Michigan State just became predictable. They came, just without any kind of intensity.
Yeah. I mean, except for Carter. I mean, that kid, we'll sing his praises more later, but he felt like one of the only players, and K'Ron Lynch, when he got the opportunity, they felt like some of the only players out there playing with urgency, and they're the only reason that we did as well as we did in last night's game. Sorry, we're recording this on Sunday. I know you all will be hearing it on Wednesday, but
so as you can tell, there's still a lot of emotion within us right now. It's still very raw. We haven't had a couple of days to process.
I am going to be negative on one more thing, and then we can turn to some more positive things. Big Ten Network. Come on. You're going to have a former U of M player as the color commentator on the MSU U of M rivalry game. Like, do better.
Who's actively calling Michigan State little brother after the game.
I feel like maybe that's like a little less terrible from like somewhere like Peacock or someone else who maybe doesn't understand the rivalry between Michigan and Michigan State. And I just feel like that's so classless. I would feel the exact same way. I'm not just saying this because I'm an MSU fan. I would feel the exact same way if you had a former MSU commentator on that game last night. It's awful to listen to as a fan. And also, other big thing that I had a beef with the commentators last night at the end of the game when whatever tiff happened, they literally pinned it on the MSU player from the start. Whose whole bench emptied after they had already won the game? Not MSU's. That's all I'm saying. And they point to the entire sea of blue and maize and say, oh yeah, that MSU player shouldn't have started that. And if you watch the replay back, you can't tell who started it. And so it's just, I just felt like it's a really classless broadcast from Big Ten Network.
Yeah, it's frustrating when you're trying to watch it. And then, you have the color commentary using rivalry jargon when he's supposed to be unbiased, when it's clearly impossible for him to be unbiased in that game.
Well, let's turn to some positives.
We'll try to end on a positive note.
Aiden Childs didn't have any interceptions.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Aiden Childs, given the opportunities that he was given, played
phenomenally.
A solid game. I think he made, there was one or two throws, especially on that last drive, that you'd have liked to have him have back. But
he had no opportunity to trust in himself prior to those last situations because coaching staff was only setting him up for these tiny little I don't know if coaching staff was like worried that he was going to throw interceptions. That's how it felt watching the game, was just like they're not giving Aiden any sort of opportunities. And so when you haven't been able to build up that self-confidence or build up that trust in yourself in the game by making completed passes and like completed passes that actually get you somewhere, no, you're probably not going to be able to make those passes in super high pressure scenarios at the end of the game when all of a sudden coaching staff decides, oh yeah, I guess we better start throwing the ball.
Right. And especially too, it's one thing if they were trying to do early in the game and it just wasn't working. But whenever they were throwing the ball down the field, they had success. In the first half, they had that 30-yard pass to Foster.
Yes.
In this fourth quarter, they threw it down the field, and Nick Marshall was able to make a play and got a touchdown. Exactly what we've been asking for
the last 35
minutes. When they
were
throwing it down the field, they were making plays happen. It just, especially Michigan was out their best cornerback.
Yes. This was a golden opportunity.
It was a golden opportunity to throw the ball down the field, put pressure, make Michigan respect the pass game too. That way they weren't just at the second half keying in on the running game. But
especially because we were doing so well in the run game. That's something that if you've been tuning into the We Got It Covered segments the last couple of weeks, we've emphasized how if you can have success in the run game, how much that opens you up to be able to pass. And it's just like we totally forgot about the second half.
Yeah, and the play action really was non-existent throughout that game and didn't really play a factor, especially, I mean, I know I went in hard last week about 49 to 56 winners of this team or this game have had more rushing yards, and Michigan State outrushed Michigan almost 100 yards. I told you, now that I said that, it's going to be the opposite. I wish it was the other way around.
I said, Jonathan Smith listened to you a little too literally.
But when you have that success on the ground and you're not utilizing the play action to kind of take the top off the defense, it just, I expected a lot more from the coaching staff, and it just seemed like they hadn't have a whole lot of sense of urgency, and seemed like once they kind of got that early touchdown lead, they played scared.
Yes, definitely. Ending on a positive note, Nate Carter, man, that kid was incredible. If you think back to the first game against Florida Atlantic and what we were saying he needed to improve on, of, really being able to put his head down and drive with his legs the way that KLA does, I think that's the reason Nate Carter got the majority of the carries last night, because he did not fail. I mean, that kid carried us through 45 of the 60 minutes, if not more, of that football game. So Nate Carter, for me, you're my player of the week this week. Way to keep your head up in the midst of just so much pressure on your back. I think sometimes it's really easy to forget with these rivalry games that these are student athletes. And so I just really want to shout out Nate Carter for how well he played last night.
Yeah, I think obviously it wasn't a perfect night, but I think another highlight, I think offensive line, all things considered, did play pretty solid in order to give Nate Carter and this rushing attack,
especially on the run protection, run coverage.
I honestly think too, all things considered, I think Childs is sacked once, maybe twice, and that's with Michigan sending a lot of blitzers. They were constantly throughout the game, and I think maybe that contributed partly to their inability to throw it down the field and try to have more of these screen plays. But I think, this young offensive line that's been banged up, who we were pretty critical on to start the year, especially when it comes to blocking for the run game, really stepped up and rushed for nearly 200 yards again. It's a very good rush defense. And moving forward, I think that's building blocks that you really just have to continue with that momentum. But ultimately, at some point, you're going to have to trust Childs.
Absolutely.
And I get this year isn't for all the marbles. This year is always going to be about development. But
I think you set the patterns this year that you want to see next year. And so if you're already giving your quarterback, and again, who knows, maybe they are very supportive of him, but just I think about building up that in-game trust. How's Aiden Childs going to feel that next year if you're not trusting him in games like this? I don't understand. Last thing I'm going to say about the game, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say, is just penalties. Obviously, we had some key, I think I accidentally said offsides earlier, but false starts that really just totally
changed drives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both of those false starts ended with 5 yards to go. So it was 4th and 5 and we punted, and then it was 4th and 5 and we went 4 on 4th. But both of those false starts don't happen. Those are 2 first downs, and those drives continue.
And one of those was in the red zone.
Yeah, I mean, one of them was on the last drive of the game on offense.
And so that's just infuriating. And then also infuriating, guess who didn't have a single penalty called on them at home? Big Ten, do better. That's all I have to say. Like, Big Ten referees, Big Ten network. It's just some of that I think you can credit to Michigan doing well, and obviously they're at home, and so those sorts of like false start penalties is probably going to be less likely to happen for them. But the fact that there was not a single penalty called on Michigan when there was so much holding going on their offense all night long is just, yeah, it just feels really
in this day and age,
gross.
And ultimately, I don't think it had that big of an impact on the game. But you can't tell me in this day and age that Michigan played a perfect game and wasn't deserving of one penalty throughout the game.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not trying to be petty towards Michigan. It's more an accountability check on refs. And that's something that I've been saying for a long time. I wish that referees had to undergo the same level of scrutiny that coaches and players have to after the game with interviews and that sort of a thing, and they don't have to. And so it just makes it, obviously I know there's supposed to be internal reviews and different things that happen, but they never have to face the same level of public scrutiny that coaches and players do. And I think that's something that should change in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last thing I'll just say is, I mean, I hate saying this, but credit to Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely. They outcoached us.
They put all their cards on the table, play with urgency, made adjustments, play with intensity, and now they can talk their talk. They earned it. Yep. So if any Spartan fans are getting mad about that online, they earned it. They beat us.
Yeah, I don't think you have a leg to stand on if you're going to hate on Michigan, other than the fact of just like, it sucks to lose to them, and it sucks. That's as painful as it is, it just shows what a good rivalry it is and how emotional people get. But I do think it's really important, like, as sad and disappointed as we are today about the results of the game, to show up as Spartan fans and really give credit where credit is due, and also be able to critically reflect on our performance. One, remembering that these are student athletes, and so being very kind in that. Like, I want to be really clear that when we're providing critiques, really most of my critiques are on the coaching staff, and I think that's fair because you're getting paid to do this job, and didn't do it well last night. All right, we love you, Spartan boys. Let's get ready to
go green as always.
Dive into some more good stuff and look forward to next week's matchup.
Well, I think that is a good transition for this week's We Got It Covered segment.
Oh, really? I don't even know what we're doing today. Enlighten me.
Yeah. So there's a couple points, a couple plays that I think are worth touching on in this game.
Before we do that, I'm sorry, just for any new listeners or maybe people who aren't super familiar with the podcast yet, we, in this segment, it's called the We Got It Covered segment, where Jonah takes myself and all you lovely listeners, viewers, through some like odd strategy, penalty, play that either happens in football or basketball to just help Spartan fans of all different experience levels kind of be able to understand the game better, to be able to tune in more. That's so much of the goal of this podcast is, to give you some fun banter, but also to really help you feel like you've got it too when it comes to Spartan sports. So take us through this week's topic.
Yeah. So the first play or rule that I want to cover today, which happened, I believe it was at Michigan State's last drive, but the intentional grounding play.
Yes.
Which resulted in a loss of downs, and the ball was spotted at where Aiden Childs threw the ball. So
which was a loss of 14 yards.
And I think there's a lot of confusion about this play because, again, there's those differences between the NFL and college.
Okay, I don't think I realized that.
Right. So essentially, in college, the intentional grounding play is called when the quarterback is within the tackle box, so in between his two offensive tackles.
Okay. So I'm visualizing lines coming back from like the outside feet of our offensive line.
Yep.
Okay.
So within that
tackle box, and basically to avoid a negative yardage, so like they're having that pressure, maybe Aiden Child's trying to avoid a sack,
and throws the ball away where there's no
eligible receiver
in their direction.
Basically, like, you're intentionally grounding it to avoid a sack and a loss of yards. You have to be able to make an actual football play to avoid the penalty.
And
so here's my question. I think I asked you this a couple weeks ago. Maybe I'm jumping the gun here.
Oh, you're fine. There
is outside boundaries. Is there a backward boundary, if that makes any sense? Like, I'm picturing it like a box. You called it a tackle box, where you've got the O-line, offensive line, and then you've got the lines coming back to create the sides of the box. Is there a back of the box?
No, there's not a back.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
It feels like if you can move laterally, then you should also be able to move back to get out of, I don't know, but I guess then it's just a greater loss of yards.
Yeah, I mean, he was 14 yards back, so where would you set that?
Yeah, that's why I didn't know if there was like 10 yards back from the line of scrimmage, you're no longer considered in the pocket, but that's not the case.
Right.
Okay.
One key point to touch on in intentional grounding is in the college rule, there's no mention of whether it matters if the ball goes past or reaches the line of scrimmage for the intentional grounding. Whereas in the NFL, if you were in the tackle box and threw it past the line of scrimmage, it would not be intentional grounding.
As long as the pass goes past the line of scrimmage, or the quarterback has to go past the line of scrimmage?
No, the ball reaches past the line of scrimmage.
Oh.
Whereas in college, it doesn't really matter if the ball reaches the line of scrimmage or not. If there's no receiver in the area and they're in the tackle box, it's intentional grounding.
That seems so odd.
I mean, yeah, it's just the differences between NFL and college.
Because I feel like in the NFL, then, it would almost be impossible to have intentional grounding. As long as you're getting it past the line of scrimmage, then it's not considered intentional grounding.
And it might be, too, in the NFL where that line of scrimmage thing matters only if you're outside the tackle box.
Oh, okay. Where it would still be intentional grounding if you're outside the pocket, but you ground it before the line of scrimmage.
Right.
Okay, that makes a little more sense.
But again, it is confusing because if you're like us, you watch NFL and college, there's two different rules. You see it differently. And I think that's just the play where you see that happen. And it's frustrating too, because it's not only is it a loss of downs, but the ball is then spotted at the point where
you don't get to replay that down and you lose so many yards.
Right. So it's a pretty massive penalty that occurred in that game.
Definitely.
Now, the second thing that I wanted to cover is, and this is the question you kind of asked me last night, is what are the rules, or what happens when the ref kind of gets in the way of a play? And this kind of benefited Michigan.
Double the content today, guys.
This kind of benefited Michigan State yesterday. Where Michigan threw a pass over the middle. And the tight end was kind of directly behind the referee. And the referee kind of at the last moment had to duck. And at that point, it was just kind of a hard play for that tight end to make.
We saw something really similar go against MSU, against Iowa the week before. We're very similar. I think it was a tight end with a pass over the middle, and he's diving for the catch. And I think he even collided with the ref, or the ref, ducked right at the last second, but it didn't help. Which
can be a frustrating thing, obviously, for the team that it happens to. But I guess what I would say is, so officially the rule is that the refs are a part of the field. So if they're in the way,
so interesting. Then, that's just one of the obstacles of the field.
Also, from the offense perspective, because usually it negatively affects the team on offense.
Absolutely. Because that ref is positioned right behind the defensive line.
Right. But the thing is, these refs line up in the same position
every single time.
Every single play. So that referee who's lined up kind of behind the defense, he's going to be in the same spot, same yards back every single time. So as an offense, you should be running plays that avoid that specific spot on the field. Because they're part of the field, and you know that they're going to be essentially in the same spot throughout the game.
That helps me. And this is why I like the We Got It Covered segment, because there are moments when my emotions get the better of me and I'm in the game and I'm like, are you kidding me? How is that not a flag? How is the ref not in the way? But it's good to know that that's part of the rule book, and that's really like an error in play calling or player positioning on the field, because they should know that that's a constant that's happening in the game. So
I'll also say that referees aren't supposed to be a brick wall as well. So there are instances where a ref just needs to get the heck out of the way because he can see that this running back is running right for him.
Yes.
And I think that sometimes they can just be stubborn and like be unnecessarily frustrating. And not that wasn't the case on
maybe refs
last
should
night.
have to face the same level of scrutiny that players, coaches have to. I'm just going to keep plugging this until maybe like the NCAA or somebody picks it up. And like, I just think it would be excellent if refs after the game had to go through an interview, especially the head ref, of like answer why they made the calls that they did. And if they actually did what they were supposed to do, that should hold up. And if they didn't,
yeah, they're getting paid a lot of money too. So
yeah, sorry, that's my little soapbox. This probably won't be the end of it during the podcast, but awesome. Okay, well, that helped me understand a couple different things. That's something we try to highlight too, is differences between NFL and college football. And I'm sure we'll do that too when we get into college basketball and NBA, because there's obviously differences there too. But yeah, our goal is just really with this segment to help all of our listeners and viewers just feel more confident. So I feel like I've got it covered now, and we hope you feel like you've got it covered too.
And if you ever have ideas or suggestions for this segment, if you have always had a question or point of confusion,
please let us know. Our email is the wegotitpodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to leave a comment too on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We will check it, and we'd love to incorporate that in a future We Got It Covered segment.
All right, guys, we're going to be moving on from the Michigan game. I know for us it's hard. Like I said, this is Sunday afternoon. The emotions are still very raw. But anyways, we want to move on to the future because we still got some football to play this year.
Absolutely,
and we're stoked about it because we love this team. We love the green and white. But before we get there and kind of preview next week's game, we wanted to take a couple minutes to touch on some basketball news, because I don't know if you're like me, but I'm stoked for basketball. We're only a couple weeks away. And
couple weeks. It's like 10 days by the time less than that by the time the episode airs. So we have a big piece of recruiting news. This might seem like it's coming out late to some of you guys, but I want you to know, and hopefully you'll kind of get used to this rhythm. We usually record a little bit earlier in the week, and then we get episodes to you on Wednesdays. So we had a new recruit commit last Tuesday, and it's a name that gets me a little excited because there's some cool... it's given me flashbacks of some good things that happened to MSU. So who is the new recruit that we landed?
Yeah, so Michigan State landed class 2025 power forward Cam Ward.
Woohoo!
And so Cam Ward is a 6'7" power forward, high 4-star, top 50 recruit in the country out of Maryland. And
interesting. Pulling all the way from the East Coast. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, Izzo really has opened up his recruiting bag in the last couple of years. He's put a lot of focus and emphasis on that and kind of stretched beyond just Michigan.
Maybe that's one good thing Mel Tucker did for us. I don't know. His recruiting game was pretty strong. I wonder if that rubbed off on Tom a little.
I don't want to think about Tucker.
We won't give him credit. I'm just trying to look for the silver linings here. I'm sorry.
But anyways, I was watching some of his highlights from high school, and this guy is literally the DNA of a Spartan.
Yes.
Through and through.
He's already too like a pretty built kid for being in high school. I'm excited about
that. I know this is again a sensitive topic maybe, but when finding a comparison, maybe you're like, well, what kind of player can we expect? And they're not totally the same. I think Cam Ward doesn't have quite the on-ball skills as his player does, but physically, I think I
know who you're gonna say.
This player is gonna be pretty similar to Miles Bridges.
Yep.
So obviously we can kind of not talk about him anymore, but when you're kind of thinking of, okay,
as a Spartan, he was great.
What can we expect on the court from this guy physically? Think of him, like I said, I think he's going to be more of
that power forward rather than like a 3 or
more emphasis in the paint. Using his physicality rather than maybe having the ball in his hands, shooting it from the outside. Not that he's not a bad shooter. I think that'll be a part of his game, but a great piece to add to this 2025 class.
I mean, Nick Ward was one of the standout players when I think about MSU in the last 20 years. And so hopefully he can carry on that namesake and bring that same kind of Spartan dog mentality that Nick Ward did. I love it.
Totally.
We are going to move on, but I'm just going to put a little plug that all of you who are tuning in, basketball season starts very soon. And we're really, really excited about basketball season. So just, keep a little ear out. There might be, I don't know, something coming your way this week.
Yeah. So keep on listening because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. We like to have little surprises here and there.
Absolutely.
Indiana.
Yeah. Well,
Indiana. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, before we get in Indiana, I feel like sometimes these previews, especially because it seems like the same things that are hindering this team continue to hinder this team. So it kind of seems like a lot of these previews end up sounding
probably kind of similar.
So before we get into the Indiana game, I don't think we have to touch a ton on that game. I wanted to just kind of ask you, kind of as we are now 2/3 of the way through the season.
That's crazy.
Kind of reassessing things as compared to maybe off-season expectations, where we thought they would be coming out of this 4-game stretch. So how do you view this team, kind of separating yourself from the emotion of the Michigan game, looking at this team 4-4, going into the last 4 games of the week? Kind of, where are your thoughts on this team in general, about where you thought they might be, where you'd hope they would be?
Right. I think I'm really thinking back to our kind of predictions and analysis from our first 2 football preseason episodes. If you haven't checked those out, I honestly think they're worth going back and listening to. We really pretty comprehensively covered the coaching staff and the new players that are on this team this year. And I feel like a lot of what we talked about is still relevant to kind of where players' development is. So honestly, would I love for us to have a better record? Would I love for us to have beat Michigan? Yes, 100%. But I'm pretty pleased with where this football team is at. If you told me we were 4-4, like 50%, I'd be like, you know what? I'll take it. Jonathan Smith's first year. We've got a 19-year-old quarterback. We've got we said 50%, over 50% of our roster is players that are new to Michigan State. And so I think, if you think about it just from that perspective, like being 4-4 is pretty impressive. And would be nice if a couple of those wins had been against more than like Prairie View, A&M. But, we beat Maryland on the road. We beat Iowa at homecoming. Like, those wins definitely count for something. And on the opposite, we have had some hard losses. Boston College on the road, Ohio State, Oregon on the road, Michigan on the road. Like, those games that we have lost have not been to Prairie Views. They haven't been to Florida Atlantics. And so I think that the record itself doesn't show the kind of grit that this team has and how much they really have truly fought through.
Yeah, I think pretty similar about this team. I think it's easy for me right now, especially last night. I was like, gosh, like this team is literally like 3 or 4 plays away from being 6-2 instead of 4-4. And it's so easy to like focus on that. Like, had Michigan State been able to execute on a couple more plays in those games, like we'd be feeling so great about this team at 6-2 right now. Absolutely. And that's just like how close. But then I kind of go back to my like preseason kind of expectations. And I think I always saw this season kind of in 3 parts.
I love it.
Like in 4 games.
Break it down for us. I love it.
So I think thinking about this team, I think that my expectations for this team in that first 4 games were to go 3-1.
Which we did.
I think I would have maybe at the beginning of the season flipped the Maryland and Boston College game. I think then, thinking of the next 4 games, Ohio State, Oregon, Iowa, Michigan, who were all ranked to start the season.
Yes.
Obviously, Ohio State and Oregon are just about as elite as you can get. And obviously those games weren't very close, but I think they were more competitive than they would have been in years past for those teams both being top 5 teams, I think. Obviously, we get that win against Iowa, which I think going into the year, I thought that was going to be a
winnable game.
I think that, just like with Iowa's style of play at night and homecoming, I thought that would be a game that would be able to win. And obviously, going into the year, I wasn't expecting a win against Michigan.
We were hopeful, obviously.
And I think now in hindsight, realizing that Michigan wasn't as good as
we made them look
projections. But
sorry.
I think we're kind of exactly on schedule.
Yeah.
I saw somebody online, I forget who it was, say like Michigan State, they're not ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
They're not behind schedule. They're kind of just like right on schedule of where you would hope this team would be. And I think going into these last 4 games, obviously a bowl game is very much still in the picture.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to be favored in at least 2 of their last 4 games in order to make that bowl game. But I think that Illinois game is a winnable game. Yeah, I think Indiana is probably, I'm hoping they can be competitive in that game, but I think it's asking a little bit too much to think that they're going to really have a chance at winning
especially
that game.
With the tear that Indiana is on. I mean, all props to them. I think it's pretty cool to see Indiana do so well this season.
Yeah. But anyways, that's just kind of assessing where we are at. Like, I think after an emotional loss like this, it's very easy to kind of feel like the world is falling down.
Yes.
And I'm in the same boat. I'm speaking.
We're very raw today.
Yeah. But I think going back about thinking of the season, what do you want to see from the Spartans team year 1?
Yes.
Like I said, we're not ahead of schedule. I think a win last night would have put us ahead of schedule, you know, or maybe a win against Boston College would have put us ahead of schedule. But Michigan State doesn't have any bad losses. They have 3 losses at night and road games.
Yes.
And the other loss at home against Ohio State. So this team doesn't have any bad losses. They have a couple good wins, solid wins. And I think there's aspects of this team that are maybe a little ahead of schedule and some teams that are maybe behind. And that's kind of where we land right kind of on schedule. But just wanted to kind of put some of that in perspective because I think after a loss like this, it can be easy to kind of feel like
just defeated.
Okay, we're done. Like maybe Jonathan Smith and his coaching staff doesn't have it. But like,
and I want to speak to that of like, I think we were pretty hard, firm maybe about the coaching staff and their performance against Michigan. And I don't want anybody tuning in to think that we are just ragging on the coaching staff as a whole or don't think that they should be here. I still have a lot of faith in Jonathan Smith, in Joe Rossi, in Brian Lindgren. Like, I think this coaching staff can do good things. I think they messed up on Saturday night. And I don't think they maybe understood the gravity of the kind of intensity the rivalry game against Michigan brings out. And so hopefully they'll know that for next year. So little learning moment.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because it's not like it was like philosophical issues from the coaching staff. Like they're correctable things. Like it's not like Michigan State hasn't been throwing the ball down the field all season. Like we saw against Iowa, against Maryland, some of these games, like they know they can do it.
Yes, exactly.
It's just like in the moment, they just kind of made wrong decisions, I think, when it came to this game specifically.
Yes.
But
we said we were done with that. We're going to move on.
I still have confidence in the staff and in this team, and I'm excited to watch them next week.
And the reason I'm bringing that up, I think, is to like, yes, it's good to reassess. Like you said, we're 2/3 of the way through the season, but then also to like not lose sight of next season. We said this from the beginning. This is a rebuilding year. And so for us to be, at 500 at this point in the season, I think is great. And I just am so excited to see where Aiden Childs goes the rest of the season, where Nick Marsh goes the rest of the season, where KLA goes the rest of the season. Like some players that we are really building into, and how much we're going to be able to do between now, the end of October, and next August. So I think it's important to kind of keep the long game in sight as well.
Totally.
Okay, now Indiana. I mean, I honestly, I'm always going to rep the Spartans, but I'm just kind of happy for Indiana. I feel like they just need a win as a state in general. And so for them to be doing, sorry for any of our Indiana listeners, we love you. But I mean, usually pretty middle of the road, especially when it comes to football. And so I'm happy for them that they're having such a great season. What do you feel like has been making Indiana tick this season?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is they just don't really have a weakness. They're just clicking in all
just solid
facets
across the board
of the team. And their new coach, Chris Signetti, James Madison, killed it in the transfer portal, brought in a lot of talent, and he just has these guys playing with a ton of belief and swagger and intensity, and it's crazy. I was watching some of their game against Washington yesterday, and it is crazy just how quickly Indiana can just totally change momentum in the moment. Washington was driving down the field, looked like they were kind of controlling the game early, looking to take an early lead. And then immediately Indiana makes a great play and gets a pick six. Wild. Totally changed the game, changes the momentum. And I've seen that kind of repeatedly throughout the season, as they just seem to be able to make those plays
in
that
key moments.
Turns on the floodgates, and it's kind of just like a snowball effect for them throughout the game.
And that kind of feels like the opposite of what we've been able to do this year. We build up a lot of momentum, and then we're on the Indiana opponent side of it, of getting it flipped on us. So we'll see if we can withstand that this upcoming week.
Yeah, I think Indiana too, I will say, and obviously I think this is a very good team. I think Indiana's going to beat us on Saturday. They really haven't played a ton of quality opponents.
That's what I was just going to say. So they're now ranked. Are they in the top 10 yet? Or are they still?
I think they were 13th heading into this week. Yeah.
What big wins do they have from this season?
Yeah, so their biggest wins were obviously their at-home game against Nebraska.
Okay.
Won 56-7. But Nebraska is okay.
Yeah.
They're not great.
But it was a very dominant win. I mean, to be able to put up that many points.
And obviously too, they kind of handily beat Washington, which is kind of, again, middle of the pack game, but they're taking care of the business they need to take care of. I think this game against Michigan State on the road, I think up to date will kind of be their toughest opponent. So it'll be interesting to see how they do, especially too, after Michigan State, they got to play Ohio State. So maybe they're going to get caught looking ahead to that game. Maybe they'll overlook Michigan State. And
especially as we just come off of a loss to U of M.
And that's what I just want to see out of the Spartans is, can they make this a game? Can they put up a fight at home, respond after really heartbreaking loss against Michigan, and make Indiana work? Can they fight back when Indiana makes that momentum shifting play and not let it snowball? Can they make this a game that goes 4 quarters? That's really what I want to see. Indiana might be a little short-handed, so a big reason for a lot of their success this year is transfer quarterback Curtis Rourke.
Okay.
Who had an injury against Nebraska a couple weeks ago, missed the game against Washington last week.
I didn't realize that.
And I think will end up being questionable for this game against Michigan State, and their backup has played pretty well.
I mean, that's what I was just going to say. He must have, if they're beating Washington. So.
But I think if they're a little different team if they don't have Rourke in there on Saturday. So something interesting to watch out for. Maybe there's this little bit of an opportunity for Michigan State, because like I said, I think this will be kind of Indiana's biggest test up to date, just because they really haven't played in a tough road environment. I think they're going to be playing a pretty hungry Michigan State team after that Michigan loss. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be a good litmus test for Michigan State, and just on
Yes,
their
that.
resiliency. Can they continue to
Mm-hmm.
improve? Because after this, they have 3 really winnable games
Yeah.
to end the season in order to get to a bowl game. And I just don't want this Michigan game to kind of be a turning point in the season where
It just goes
that
down.
intensity loses. And I think they really need to keep it up
Yes.
so they can win those games later in the season.
Hold on to that grit that we've had throughout the season. Hold on to that Spartan dog mentality. I definitely think we need to see some coaching adjustments against Indiana. And continuing to just build that trust into Aiden. I think that that's huge. And we've talked so much about continuing to improve the O-line, being able to actually make good play calls in the red zone. But I think that is going to be something that might not be fixable if we don't start to build that trust into Aiden in the last 4 games of the season. I think that if we continue to limit him and play scared, honestly, of him throwing interceptions, that's not going to bode well for next year. And I think it's going to be a lot harder to build that confidence outside of gameplay, like in training and spring training and those sorts of things, if we don't start instilling that confidence from the coaching staff. And I think even too from us fans, like, hype your boy up. I don't know. I really think that that's so vital for such a young quarterback to be put in that level of pressure, but then doesn't feel like he's really been fully trusted these last couple games. And so I think that's just really, really important.
Yeah, and I think, going into kind of how I was blocking up the season in 3 parts, I think that's really my big focus or hope for this last 4 games is, can they win these games against teams who are like in their similar tier?
Yeah.
It's not the Ohio States, it's not the Oregons, it's not the Michigans. And can they get that momentum and confidence, not only for Aiden Child, but for this entire team going into next year? I think part of that's crucial of getting a bowl game, getting those extra practices, having the opportunity to develop as a team, and get that momentum heading into next season with confidence as well.
That's a really good point, and maybe we can end on this. I think that bowl games are a little silly. Like, it just feels, especially for a team that goes like whatever 7-5 or 6-6, it kind of feels a little bit like a participation award. But when you word it that way, I see the value in that of like, you get a whole nother month where you're bringing a kind of intensity for something that does feel like, hey, this actually counts for something. It's something that we can hang up in the trophy room or whatever. Maybe the game itself doesn't mean that much, but the work that goes into getting ready for that game, I've never thought about it like that. And I feel like that's kind of a cool motivating factor.
They especially matter for teams in Michigan State's scenario where new coaching staff, young team, where getting those 3 or 4 weeks of extra practice, getting a bowl game to kind of get momentum going into the next season really can make an impact for these young teams. And like 3 weeks of practice without games, like,
there's a lot you can get done.
You're not just kind of working to clean things up. Like, you're kind of working to maybe re-implement things or add new wrinkles to your offense and your defense. Like, those practices can have a lot of impact. So
yeah, that's really cool.
I really hope that these last 4 weeks can be that for this team, because I think moving forward, it could really kind of be a big stepping stone to the greater trajectory of the program.
Definitely. Well, I think we covered a lot today. I'm sorry if this episode's a little longer, but I think it was needed to kind of work out the loss from our system. Hopefully help you guys have a little bit more clarity on both intentional grounding and when those referees just will not get out of the way on the field. And then also kind of recenter ourselves, think about where we've come from this season, where we're going, and get you excited for basketball. So I think it's been a really productive episode.
I'm excited for the rest of the season. Breathe.
Yes.
We're still fighting for the only colors.
Absolutely.
Our specialty is still good ball.
Yes, absolutely.
But as always,
go green,
go white,
go state.